So now I am very excited to share just a little bit about some of the advocacy that we've been doing with the guidance and help of Govind and so many other people. But before that, I just wanted to share a very brief kind of overview of my own journey and how I got to Hindus for Human Rights today. So similarly, like Govind, I grew up here in the United States. I grew up in the other Washington, not DC where I am, but the suburbs of Seattle, in a Indian American family. My family is from South India. And I think growing up as a racial minority and also religious minority in a very majority white Christian kind of school and community, for me, my faith and my culture were things which I saw as very positive and something that made me unique and sort of special. And of course, as I grew older, I saw some of the harms of these identities, which were for me so positive and empowering. Narendra Modi was elected as India's prime minister around my senior year of high school, which was really my first introduction to Hindutva, Hindu nationalism. And then a few years later, I saw when, during the 2016 election here, that the rise of groups like Hindus for Trump and Republican Hindu Coalition. And so I was seeing, this identity, which for me was such a positive thing, was really, also a tool of violence and oppression. And seeing the headlines coming out of India, almost every day after Modi's election, it was, really horrifying. And at the beginning of college, I started learning more about caste and reading some of Dr. Ambedkar's work. And all of that kind of drove me to find progressive Hindu community, which for me was Sadhana, the organization which Sunita founded in 2011. And so Sadhana became my spiritual home, I'd say, and I joined in the beginning of my college career. And I was studying public policy and very interested in these issues of human rights and democracy in India. And so when I graduated last year with the master's in public policy from Chicago, and then I moved to DC, and I was just so excited when I'd been volunteering on and off with Hindus for Human Rights, but I was so excited to hear that they had been able to fundraise with all of your support to hire a full-time position for advocacy. And I joined in March, and it has just been so much, I feel like fun is a weird way to describe this work sometimes, but I really have enjoyed working with Sunita and Raju and the rest of our team, and of course, all of our partner organizations as well. So I can't possibly describe all of the advocacy we've done in the last year, but I did want to share a few sort of key themes and highlights, and of course, happy to answer more questions in the Q&A section. So the first reason we were founded, as I'm sure all of you are aware, was to provide a more inclusive and progressive Hindu public voice. And so when I started with Hindus for Human Rights in March, our first thing that we were thinking about is how do we get into all of these advocacy spaces in Washington, DC, where for years the only Hindu voice has been that of the Hindu right, groups that are aligned with the ideology of Hindu nationalism. And so this means in spaces like the International Religious Freedom Roundtable, where we're a co-chair of the India Working Group, we are finally another Hindu voice that is not coming from the Hindu nationalist kind of perspective. And this is, groups in DC have taken note of this sort of shift in the advocacy space. The Center for American Progress, for example, named Sunita as one of their faith leaders to watch this year, where previously the only other Hindu who ever got that award was from a Hindutva-aligned organization. And even on the global stage and in platforms like the G20 Interfaith Forum, where I was invited as a delegate, we actually had the opportunity to provide the sole Hindu perspective, which showed that this progressive Hindu voice was really something that people were looking for and something that is desperately needed both in DC and globally as well. So we've taken on, the Hindu right in several different ways through a number of campaigns. Some of these include very public efforts, such as in April when the VHPA, one of the largest Hindutva-aligned organizations here, decided to invite this extremist Islamophobic Hindu religious leader for a series of discourses and virtual events. We got that canceled in just 2 days with a public campaign where the VHPA actually dropped that event series. Similarly, later that year, when Santa Clara County in California was starting to hear testimonies and stories about caste discrimination and thinking about whether to institute legal protections, the only Hindu organizations they were hearing from were saying caste, is not part of our culture. It's irrelevant to talk about caste. If you're talking about caste, that's actually Hindu phobic. And so we were the only Hindu group that came in and said, no, we believe that you can't brush caste under the rug. Caste discrimination is real. We work with a number of Dalit and anti-caste groups who can testify to this. And so we did send a letter to the county, which they're very receptive and welcoming of. Similarly, that this has put us in sort of a confrontation in a way with a number of these Hindu nationalist groups. And so many of you are probably familiar that one of the largest Hindu groups in this country has filed a lawsuit against our co-founders, Sunita and Raju. And we have been able to actually leverage this lawsuit, which was filed for simply speaking out against Hindu nationalism. We've leveraged this into massive shows of support and solidarity from over 400 academics and writers, for example, over 40 organizations from the South Asian diaspora. And again, using this as an opportunity to highlight the need for an inclusive, progressive Hindu voice. Another one of our major themes in our advocacy has been focusing on the Biden administration, and particularly pushing them to be more vocal on human rights issues in India. This has been done through a number of ways. We've had over 20 face-to-face meetings, for example, with congressional offices. We've worked with one of our very close partners, Indian American Muslim Council, to organize these series of bi-weekly congressional briefings, which we've held over 15 since April of this year with 16 other human rights organizations. And to date, we featured over 60 frontline activists and speakers from India who are directly sharing with congressional staff about the most pressing democracy, human rights, civil rights issues in India. In addition, we've also started a monthly email newsletter for congressional staff, which is reaching nearly 550 congressional staffers each month, giving them the most up-to-date issues on what's happening in India and how can the US government act. Through all of this work, we're very rarely, if ever, doing this alone. We believe very strongly in the importance of diverse and broad coalitions. And so our coalition work has been at the core of building up our advocacy profile. And we've been really excited to build some strong alliances. Of course, as a Hindu organization, our most immediate partners and allies come from within the South Asian diaspora. And I feel very proud and happy to say that we're probably in globally, but certainly in the US, we are the only Hindu organization that has built strong relationships and coalitions with Dalit groups, anti-caste groups, with Muslim groups, Christian groups, secular organizations across the Indian diaspora and the South Asian diaspora. And we're seeing now that, we're, like Govind said, we are providing a leading voice in the broader progressive movement in our community. But just beyond just the South Asian community, we've also built relationships in the broader progressive movement. And the goal, of course, is to get our issues of Hindutva and caste and Islamophobia in India onto the broader progressive movement's agenda here in the US. And so we've been able to build relationships with Black American civil rights groups, with environmental and indigenous groups, Jewish organizations such as Jewish Voice for Peace, who we'll be hearing from very soon, as well as a number of other multi-faith partners in the broader progressive movement who similarly we hear constantly that, they're so relieved that finally there's a progressive Hindu voice that they're able to partner with and build with. And finally, one of the areas which I'm very excited to share about is our media advocacy, where we've been able to build up a strong profile over the last year. Over the course of 2021, we have published 27 op-eds and articles in 9 different news outlets, including some very prominent American outlets, Indian platforms, and also Indian American news outlets. And not just writing our own op-eds and articles, but we have been written about actually quite a lot. So over the last year, we've had over 120 articles and interviews in over 50 outlets around the world, which again span some very prominent international outlets, the most popular outlets in India and the Indian American community, and a number of local news as well. And then finally, we've also been able to get onto TV, which is I think a new experience for Hindus for Human Rights, but we were invited onto MSNBC's Mehdi Hassan show. We were on NDTV earlier this year, and also on Indian American channels such as TV Asia, which we believe it's, all of the large channels are important, but getting into the households that, of our own community where we know that our friends and family are watching these shows, providing that important progressive voice is something that we're very proud of. And also, this is not on the slide, but we've been able to launch our own media advocacy efforts with an organization in India called Paigam. And so we've started a media series called Voices of Peace, which is meant to counter a lot of the misinformation, hateful kind of disinformation and hate speech that's being spread through Indian social media on WhatsApp and other platforms. These short sort of 5-minute social media friendly sort of documentaries, photo essays, highlighting stories of communal harmony and social justice across India, not just in large cities, but in towns and villages. So that's a very quick bird's eye view kind of overview of our advocacy over the last year. We have built, as you can tell, a lot of momentum that we're really excited to take into the new year, hopefully with all of your support. So at this point, we're going to hear a message from India. And one of the areas of our advocacy, which is really important, is around prisoners of conscience, which Govind mentioned in the earlier message. And although we're primarily based in the US, we're very honored to have esteemed advisory board members and well-wishers from India. One of those is a prisoner of conscience who's still in jail right now in India, Omar Khalid, a student activist. And so the video that we'll play was recorded just days before he was arrested on September 14th, 2020, in connection with the anti-Muslim riots in Delhi earlier that year. And he was actually speaking at a webinar hosted by Hindus for Human Rights. So we will hear in his own words his thoughts about Hindus for Human Rights and the importance of our work.
That is appropriate or
organization that you belong to.
Passive.
Sunita, first of all, I really like the name of the organization that you belong to, Hindus for Human Rights, because it just counters the Hindutva agenda that Hindutva is Hinduism. Hindutva and Hinduism are two different things. And connecting to the previous questions, a small digression of what are we doing to bring different communities together. I think the onus of that also lies to a large extent on people who belong to this constructed majority. And this is a problem that we faced during the Shaheen Bagh movement, that while there were a lot of Shaheen Bagh inspired movements in Muslim ghettos across the country, you hardly had similar protests in other community, in localities where other communities live. And an initiative like yours is extremely commendable in these times. And I can't even imagine that the kind of backlash that you might be facing in WhatsApp groups and in different things. As to this argument, I agree with Mr. Gandhi that it's very unlikely that Mr. Trump will act and sort of on these reports and severe ties with India, or even severe ties is a long thing. Even to give a statement on these things happening in India, I don't expect Donald Trump to make those statements right now. But what else do you do sitting in America? You people are not doing this. This is like there used to be this argument that used to come that if a husband is beating a wife, that keep this family troubles at home, the wife should not go out and speak about this in the society because then ghar ka naam badnaam hoga. This is not that कि हमको घर का नाम बदनाम नहीं करना है इसलिए जो हो रहा है. You are Indians and you are concerned about what's happening in India, which is why you are saying this and you want this to stop. And you are saying this for India to become a better place for everyone. It's your love for India that is making you do so. It's not the other way around. And a campaign like this has happened. What would this people have said to Jewish Americans during the Second World War and when they had been speaking about Hitler that no, don't speak about Hitler. So this is a way to silence people, to shut people by if they use different ways of doing so. I think you're doing phenomenal work, and this is your love for country which is making you do so. So I think that's the way to counter it. I mean, you're living in the United States of America, so that's where you do your activism also. If you were living elsewhere, you would do it elsewhere.
So yeah, I mean, you can't watch that without, sort of smiling, but also, Umar Khalid is still in jail, and all of these months later. And we actually held a congressional briefing a few weeks ago on prisoners of conscience featuring their family members. And so we heard directly from Umar Khalid's father. Earlier this year, we had a Ambedkar Jayanti event featuring Umar Khalid's friend, sharing about his case and situation. Where we also were very lucky to feature Mahatma Gandhi's grandson, Professor Rajmohan Gandhi, who's actually joined us on this call, as well as Baba Sahib Ambedkar's granddaughter. And so that was just one of these, events where we're so lucky to be connected with people like Umar Khalid and all of our speakers, in India who are really believing in this work and wanting to see it grow. So at this point, I'm very excited to turn it over to our next speaker, Rabbi Alyssa Wise, who is the former Deputy Director of Jewish Voice for Peace. We have had the pleasure of working with Alyssa over the last year. She was the facilitator at our strategic planning retreat this past August, and someone who really believes in this work and has actually done similar work in her own community, in the Jewish community, building a strong, vibrant, progressive movement. And so she'll be sharing a little bit about her journey with her community and the importance of a progressive Hindu voice. So it's all yours, Alyssa.
Hi, thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I'm delighted that part of my post-Jewish Voice for Peace life is building a new family with you all at Hindus for Human Rights. So thank you for inviting me here. I see so much of the beginning of when I was at JVP and where Hindus for Human Rights is now, and it has me so excited and hopeful for what the future brings for you all. So when I started at JVP, over almost 11 years ago. I just left my role at JVP a few months ago, but when I started at JVP, we were small. I was the 6th staff person, and we had a few hundred members and a couple chapters. And when I left 10 years later, we had over 20,000 members, over 70 chapters, and an over $4 million budget. So in the time that I was there, I saw tremendous growth of the organization, and it was amazing to kind of shepherd that and see that there was energy coming for this work, that it was about us creating the right containers in order to harness the energy that kept growing and growing. And honestly, at JVP, which I can imagine being similar at HFHR, is that you could kind of like map JVP's growth in tandem with escalated assaults on Palestinians, whether in God, like the kind of every few years assaults on Gaza, or kind of a big moment of confrontation with the Israeli government of Palestinians inside Israel, or even moments when Israel took aim at us, right? And so, as you said about half, attacking you all, right? That to me, that's a sign of you all doing something right. And so I see in HFHR what I saw and see in JVP, right? A group of committed and smart people who will never take no for an answer and will keep pushing and pushing for as long as it takes. A group of people who feel invested in their culture and their people and refuse to let our cultural traditions and our religious practices be hijacked by those who lust for power and control and dominance, right? That is a place where we, JVP and HFHR, really are kindred spirits. I see in you all an influential and engaged progressive base of supporters in the US, just like JVP has had, that the work is to like agitate and organize them into speaking out on their communities and our community's complicity in violations of human rights in a country that speaks in your name. That is true for you all as it is for me as a Jewish person as it relates to Israel. And I see in HFHR the same delightful improbability that I found in JVP, how unlikely and incredibly wonderful it is to find each other and build power to make change together. I just was lighting the candles with my family for Hanukkah tonight, and talking with the kids about the meaning of the story and this kind of lesson in it, right? That one portion of oil lasted for 8 days, right? And that's the miracle, right? That we celebrate during Hanukkah. And, there is something about that feels like so at the core, both of like what it means for me, what it meant for me to build and grow JVP, right? It was like this little portion of oil, this like little group of committed people, right? Which is what HFHR is now, right? It's like a strong group of committed people. And it seems like just enough oil for one day, but maybe it's going to last for 8 and it's going to multiply and multiply, right? And so it's this lesson of kind of how improbable it might seem that we would find each other, and the kind of miracle, right? That despite everything, we take these strong political and moral stances, and it's not easy to do so, right? There's the reputational risk that comes for it, right? The lawsuit that Sunita and Raju are experiencing. And it's not for the faint of heart. I think those of you on this call who speak out against Hindutva know what it means, like the backlash that we experience when we speak out about it, and the millions of dollars that go into the PR campaigns that defend Zionism and that defend Hindutva. And, I think that that's all the more reason why we need to organize together, like why organizing together as Hindus or as Jews is so important is, Nikhil, when you were talking about, a place that was your spiritual home, and having a political home is actually so critical to how we do our work, and that having a place where you have like-minded people that grew up in the same kind of traditions that you grew up in, with the same kind of stories and foods and holiday cycle, and a feeling that you don't want to put that down, right? That's part of your cultural inheritance, but you need to separate, right? And kind of wrestle it back from those who want to take those rituals and take those commitments and turn them into violence, and turn them into occupation, and turn them into dispossession. And I think one of the reasons why we make such good partners right now is because Israel and India have become all too close of partners in the past number of years, right? Where I think in the past, India had more been aligned with the Palestinian cause, right? And then since Modi took office, his policies and commitments, right, have led to more increasing alignment with Israel and away from that India's traditional alliance with Palestinians. So Israel now makes defense deals with India based on a set of shared values of surveillance, weaponry, reconnaissance, domination, right? And of course, Israel tests and develops these weapons that then they are now selling to India on a captive Palestinian population. And so the Modi government now is apparently, I don't know the most recent data, but in recent years, has been Israel's largest customer of weapons, and weapons that are used violently and in the name of Hinduism, just the way that Israel uses these weapons in the name of Judaism, and so for us to mutually support each other, right? Like, I think one of the things that's been so nice about getting to know HFHR and see you all building your work is that it actually is like really emotionally important for me to have you all see what JVP has done and how we've approached it, and to see what we're doing and say, actually, like, we want to do that too. It's like, it's so validating and affirming, right? Because of all the hatred that we get, and because of all the negativity, right, that we get, and because of the like billion-dollar industry that wants, at least I could speak for us as the Jewish community, to to kind of tell us that we are self-hating Jews, or we ourselves are anti-Semitic, or we, like there's a lot of those messages that come at us that likewise come at you. And it's that community building and that building across faith that's going to allow us to be more successful. And so as I look at what HFHR is looking to do in the coming years, right? I see you all building power in DC by building power outside of DC, which is the main way that JVP built our power, right? So part of the way that works, right? Like part of that idea of building power in DC by building out the power outside of DC is that you build your base of support around the country so that when you go to Congress or the State Department or the UN, you have tens of thousands of people with you, right? And that's how you get people to listen to you in those halls of power. And I think that it's possible for you all to activate that large number of people with you, just as as JVP has figured out how to do. And I think, Hindu nationalism is not yet a part of the broader non-South Asian left progressive agenda, but it does belong there, right? So organizations like JVP, like the Movement for Black Lives, like the Movement for Indigenous Rights and for immigrant rights, like those organizations and those movements are natural allies for HFHR. And it makes sense that you all are looking towards solidifying those relationships to be part of a broad intersectional movement that's being built, right? So, for JVP, like part of it was like building around, supporting, getting to a place where the squad is in power, right? And other progressives in DC are just the right messengers for your issue and for Hindu nationalism, for linking it to these other issues, right? So, and part of that for me is that makes me so excited to see you all where you are, is that I think that there's a better chance, like for my work, right, about combating Zionism and organizing the Jewish community against Zionism. I think we will be more successful in doing that if there's also a vibrant Hindu movement opposing Hindutva, right? Because it de-exceptionalizes, right? Because a lot of us, have heard that this is also a phenomenon that Israel and India aren't just sharing weapons, they're also sharing PR strategies. So the ways that the weaponization of anti-Semitism has been used to stifle critique of Israel and advocacy for Palestinian rights, we're seeing indications that there's a similar strategy being developed around Hindu phobia, and that there's a weaponization of kind of following the zeitgeist of the racial justice uprising that's happening in the US around the world to kind of like shield themselves from critique and accountability for human rights violations by lifting up these forms of oppression. And so I think that the more that we're able to show that actually what we're fighting is religious nationalism based in militarism and based in like a capitalist sense of militarism, like the more successful that we're going to be. So I think in closing, I just want to say that been so impressed working with this team and inspired by you all. Like the only thing that's stopping this team is the hours in the day, right? And the resources that they have at their disposal. And I think that there are enough resources that could be collectively pooled from individuals like you all and growing, right? So like a lot of you on this call have generously stepped up to allow this organization to continue to grow. And so that's going to need to continue. So like for every one of you, are there 2 friends that you have that you could invite to join you in supporting this work? Because I think that's what it's going to take. Like it's likely that's how this organization is going to be able to build, right? And so it's both that the organization needs more people so that there's more hours in the day for people to be doing the work, moving this forward, but also there's other kinds of things that are needed. There needs software and other kinds of databases to communicate smartly with the growing base of supporters that you have and to engage in digital advocacy with elected officials, right? There are smart tools that have been developed that HFHR should have at their disposal in order to engage people in their advocacy in DC, for example. Those things also cost money, and having the right databases to stay in communication with everybody. So your vision is clear and you have smart strategies, and it's just about organizing the money in order to get there. So I hope all of you will think about supporting HFHR however you can, and encouraging those in your networks too, right? Because like you all know the people who are the most likely to be willing to step up. So you all being successful, I feel like brings all of us closer to a world redeemed, and that it's going to be a multiracial, multi-faith alliance. That's our best chance to unite the kind of grassroots global movement that we need to reject religious nationalisms of all stripes. So I feel more safe and powerful as a Jew speaking out against Zionism, knowing you all are taking the same risks. And I'm looking forward to seeing where you all go and what you all do in the year to come. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. I mean, there's just every time you share about, your journey and the work and the connections, between what you've seen with JVP's growth and the potential with HFHR. I mean, it just means so much to have you as a guide and supporter. And we are very much, looking forward to the day where we get to share, to another small organization of like, here's how we grew and built our movement. And so really appreciate you taking the time to share. And I know we are getting up to the hour here, so I wanted to very quickly, on the note of moving forward, share just very briefly about our vision for the upcoming year. And like many of our speakers have reiterated here, if you look for a Hindu voice speaking on democracy, human rights, civil rights, it's really just us, globally, that is true. And despite this lawsuit and the attacks from our community, we are pushing forward because we believe this is so important. And in the coming year, one of the areas we really want to push is getting the US administration to be more vocal on India. And there are geopolitical considerations and all of these national security questions here. But at the end of the day, as US and India are becoming closer strategic partners, we believe that friends have to be able to hold each other accountable. And so we are pushing hard in very specific strategic ways, such as around the Democracy Summit that's being organized by the State Department just next week. And right now, as we speak, we're scheduling this massive sort of wave of meetings with Congress and local officials as well for the upcoming year. And in 2022, we have some very exciting initiatives in the work. We are working with several Dalit and anti-caste groups to organize a conference focusing on caste. Our second annual civil rights essay contest will also be focusing on caste and activating young people in the South Asian community here. We have a research initiative focusing on the US-India temple building industry and exploitation there, and so much more. And we have global growth as well. We have a vibrant chapter in Australia and New Zealand that's gotten started. We're building a chapter in the United Kingdom as well. And so it's a really exciting time to be, part of this movement. And in order to do this, though, we really need to increase our capacity and particularly staff capacity. And so we are having some very exciting conversations right now with human rights funders. But our goal, of course, is to build, our individual donor base, and that means support from people like you. So in the next year, we are hoping to double our budget to $300,000, and we would like to raise half of this amount, $150,000, from individual donors between now and next year. So please consider making a donation to our 2022 Growth Fund. And for us, this number seems like a lot. It's a very exciting goalpost, but this is just 1/10 of the budget of the largest Hindu group in the US. So we have a long way to go, and we're excited to build, to get there. And we hope all of you will be part of that journey along the way. So we do have some exciting events coming up just as we enter the holiday season. We hope you will join us on December 18th for our end of year gala, featuring some very prominent comedians and musicians you are probably familiar with, as well as we have a perfect holiday gift for this upcoming year, a beautiful calendar that came out actually of our retreat with Alyssa earlier this year, and highlighting important festivals and social justice movement anniversaries and beautiful art from around the world. So we'll send some of those links in the Zoom chat. And I know we are coming up to the hour, but I did want to offer Govind the chance to offer any final remarks.